Do you know how the local council is really spending your money? Well, the BBC did something interesting for once. They explored the issue of local councils losing funding and why they're having to cut back. Now, we already know that many councils are guilty of spending way too much money on non-essential services, frivolous and stupid things like, multicultural events and celebrations, or even translation services for people who couldn't be bothered to learn English when they moved here. But regardless of these inappropriate and irresponsible spending habits, there's some real issues here, and I want to take a look at the analysis offered to us by the BBC. Now, their data shows us that the only area of spending that's increased is children's social care, which has gone up by 12%, a very important area of spending, I'm sure you'll agree. Other services, however, from the environment to planning, have actually decreased. Housing and planning spending has gone down by 48% and 55%, respectively, which of course explains the hysteria from the left about the lack of spending on housing, the big cuts and all that stuff. It all explains it. They want more houses for more immigrants. Simple but true. Here's the thing. Now, I understand the need for austerity. It's a sad fact that the government has to stop spending, but at the end of the day, the government's not got infinite amounts of money. They have to stop spending sometimes. Austerity simply means not spending more than we can afford. The government has to cap that spending, but at the same time, good quality services should always be provided to the taxpayer because at the end of the day, it's paid for by the taxpayer. We expect good services. The fact that the highways and transport spending has gone down by 40% should shock nobody. If you're British and you're watching this, I'm sure you'll share my pain when I say I've spent a fortune over the last year repairing my car because of potholes. I've had a broken suspension, popped tyres, the tracking's gone and all sorts. And I tell you, I've spent nearly almost the value of my car fixing the bloody thing because the roads they're a nightmare. It's like dodging potholes every single day. I pay my council tax and I pay my road tax, so I expect that money to be used to make sure the road doesn't destroy my car. Simple as that, really. But the real outrage here is coming from the left, and they're focusing on the reduced spending in housing. And I don't get it. How much housing are we realistically meant to have in the UK? And how many people are we meant to be accommodating for? They talk about austerity. Well, how much money and how much debt are we meant to get into to pay for more people to move here and to pay for more houses built on our beautiful countryside? Now, housing expenditure might have decreased by 48%, but would the impact be felt so hard if we weren't struggling to house so many newcomers? If we had to reduce spending because of austerity, then just how difficult would it be if we weren't importing hundreds of thousands of new people every single year? It's putting a strain on our resources, there's no question about it. In fact, the Migration Observatory showed that 17% of foreign-born individuals in the UK were in social housing in the second quarter of 2017. Now, that's a lot of people. They explain that the positive net migration affects house prices and rents, of course. But in the case of social housing, which is the issue here, council houses paid for by the councils, there's no price mechanism, so it simply results in a shortage of social housing, causes homelessness, and exaggerates the effect of spending cuts by local councils. So if we have to make cuts, we should be ensuring that we aren't providing for too many people. It's simple economics. It's not even economics, it's simple mathematics and basic logic. And now, while the percentage of migrants using social housing actually isn't hugely different to the percentage of British people using social housing, there's an important difference, of course, because British-born citizens immediately have a right to access these services because they've been paying into the system their entire life, and their family have been paying into the system for many generations. Foreign-born occupants of social housing are placing a strain on the system because they haven't been paying into the system. We simply don't have enough money. And the Migration Observatory found that the probability of migrants using social housing benefits is increasing by 0.08% every year in the UK. So after a third of councils in the UK have had to halve their housing spend in order to prioritise health and social care services, don't you think it's logical for the government to look for ways to reduce the strain on our social services? Sounds logical and simple to me. Doesn't it make sense to look at our current immigration policy and make changes that would reduce the impact of austerity? Because unfortunately sometimes austerity needs to happen. We can't slash public services and then import hundreds of thousands of people who are going to rely on the already strained public services. This is basic logic. Why can't the politicians see this? If we must slash council funding, if that has to happen, then our government should be looking at ways to manage the burden on our local councils. Our roads are falling apart. We have a housing shortage that's going on like crazy, created by the government, and all the while the elderly and vulnerable British people are suffering. You're right to be angry about local council misspending funds, spending it on translation for people who couldn't be bothered to learn English and things like that. It's certainly happened a lot. They waste a lot of money, but we are reaching a point where no council, no matter who is elected into that council, can actually ensure that the services we need are provided to us. And that's a problem our government should be looking to address. If a council cannot provide the services to the people, no matter who is elected, if too many people are accessing our social care services, it's time for the government to look at this, and it's time for the government to act. We're not funded by the government, we don't have big sponsors, and we certainly don't have massive donors. If you'd like to help support our work, please go to rebeldonations.com/thebuck.